Super Mario or Sonic?
Sonic.
Native or interstitials?
Interstitial.
You're listening to Level Up with Melissa Zalouf from Iron Source.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Melissa Zalouf, and you're listening to Level Up, the podcast for people who love making, growing, and of course, playing mobile games. Today on the show, we have Benoit, and actually, how do I pronounce your surname?
Benoit Vatere. I know. It's not an easy one, but here, I mean, usually I was born and raised in France. So in French, you say it Vatere. Here in the US, most of the people say Vatere. So I'm good with both.
Okay, so Benoit Vatere or Vatere, depending on where you're located.
Exactly.
CEO and founder at Mammoth Media. Thank you very much for being on the show today, Benoit.
Thank you for having me.
So in today's episode, we're going to be talking about designing games for that elusive Gen Z audience. But before we dive in, Benoit, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you end up in the gaming industry?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been an entrepreneur my entire life. Did my first startup out of college back in France, sold it and moved to the US, to LA in 2003. So I've been in LA for the last 16 years. And I got into gaming actually through the gaming network where I was the CEO of Play Heaven back in 2013 and 14. Was a pretty big network back then when video ads were not yet too big, and we were mostly playing with display ads. So I ran the network for a couple of years before selling it to RockU, a gaming studio out of San Francisco. So during those almost 2 years, learn in depth the gaming space and understanding both sides, monetization and user acquisition. So from that experience, I learned a lot and wanted to apply what I learned into gaming to other type of media.
Mm-hmm. But were you kind of always a gamer?
I did, yeah. I mean, obviously, I grew up with consoles and played games a lot. So yeah, I always been in the gaming side as a consumer.
Mm-hmm. And what was the transition like from sort of going from the business side of things to the creation and kind of owning the product?
It's I mean, on the network side, it was really about understanding how you monetize and how you acquire users at scale, and coming into that space was mind blowing to understand and see how sophisticated gaming publishers are, and the ability to scale fast and understand very clearly at a very granular level what's going on, and for me, always being in that space of monetization and user acquisition, but outside of gaming, when I came into the gaming space, I was really, really impressed.
Yeah, I could see that definitely being the case. Do you have a preference on kind of which side of the line? Not that there's a line, but which side of the coin you'd like to be on?
It's tough to say because they work together, obviously. But I love, yes, the rush of scale and acquiring thousands and millions of users. And when you see those real time dashboards and you see things taking off, it's a great feeling, and I love the rush. So if I had to pick one side, I would be on the user acquisition side.
Mm-hmm. And tell us a little bit more about Mammoth and kind of how it came about. It came from am I right in saying it came from an incubator sort of accelerator science?
Yes, yeah. So actually, yeah, what happened is after I sold Play Heaven, the idea was I knowing the media space outside of gaming pretty well, and seeing that not a lot was really done in terms of building a media company mobile first. Everybody was basically building content on top of social platform, but nobody really owned their audience nor their monetization. And so I figured that was a huge opportunity to bring the gaming knowledge around monetization and user acquisition to content entertainment.
Mm.
And back then, I was really close, obviously, to the team at Science with Mike Jones, the founder of the incubator Science, and run by him, obviously, the idea that I had to merge the gaming and media entertainment into that company called Mammoth, and he was really excited about the idea. I decided to incubate the idea within science. So I started as a project within science and grew from there.
Cool. And so to kind of dive into our subject for the day, I'd actually like to start by defining Gen Z. Um,
Yep.
Most people probably assume that they know what it refers to, and I feel like these terms get bandied about all the time. And I think it's useful sometimes to remind ourselves what they mean. I, for example, am always
Yeah.
surprised when I am reminded that I'm a millennial,
Yep.
because I don't feel like one. So how old
Mhm.
are Gen Z? Who are they? What percentage of the market do they represent?
Yes, so you're right. It's very confusing sometimes because Gen Z is used as a term for everything that basically are people that are young, but there are millennials, there are Gen Z. Gen Z, as a definition, is anybody born between 1995 and 2019. So it's basically people that are up to 24 years old, after that it's millennial. So people born before 1995 are millennial, and then before millennial are the Gen X, and then before Gen X are the baby boomers. So the Gen Z are really the latest generation. We're thinking there are thoughts about another generation post Gen Z that maybe is getting defined right now as the Gen Alpha, but hasn't been yet clarified. So right now we're right in Gen Z, but it goes all the way to 24 years old. So it's a pretty wide range.
Mm-hmm.
But as you look at the size of the market, for the US, it's about 74 million US people, and globally, it's 2 billion people.
Wow.
But what is very interesting is the number that says that by 2030, so within the next 10 years, the Gen Z will represent 70% of the consumers in the world. So this is a massive audience to work with, and obviously, when it comes to mobile, this is the generation that spends a lot of time on mobile. And I have like a couple interesting facts that maybe are interesting to share around Gen Z. It's the Gen Z folks are like at least for people that were born and raised in the U.S. All the Gen Z are too young to remember or were born after 9/11,
Mm.
right? So that tells you about what kind of population we are talking about. And for them, their core social media outlet for the millennials was Facebook. For them, they are into the Snapchat, TikTok generation. They are not on Facebook, right?
Mm-hmm.
And but they were born and raised with connectivity, with Wi-Fi, with the iPhone. So they haven't known the world without all those gadgets and high-speed connection and ability to be online all the time.
Right. And what are some of the stereotypes you think older generations have about Gen Z?
I think the stereotype is people on their phone all the time. It's people taking selfies and posting on social platforms. It's cord cutters. They don't watch bigger
Mm-hmm.
screen anymore. All those things are really defining the generation. And it's text messaging. It's Snapchat. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's all those things that as we get older, it was like, why are they spending so much time on their phone? And I think that characterize the Generation Z.
Mm-hmm. And kind of what makes them tick? What do they care about versus sort of, I mean, you mentioned 9/11. That's a pretty massive sort of watershed moment. And
Yeah.
also kind of being digital natives. I still remember the world before sort of mobile phones and the internet just about. But being born with all of those things sort of already existing is obviously kind of a big, is a game changer. So kind of what makes this
Yeah.
audience tick?
I think right now that's interesting. I think we're going back because they were born with this. They have access to a lot of information and they are connected and get information close to real time. I think they start caring a lot more about things that millennials didn't care much about, meaning like financial stability is a big thing in the Generation Z.
Mm.
Caring about what's going on in the world is a big thing with climate change. So things that people actually, it may not be well understood, but that generation, because they have access to a lot of information and I've seen their parents not really caring much about it, go the other way around and really care about things that we didn't care about.
Mm, mm. And what about sort of how they engage with content? If we look at sort of the stories you have on Yarn, such as the Ascension series,
Hmm.
taking that as an example,
Yep.
How does Gen Z differ from, say, millennials in how they engage with content?
So, especially, I mean, what is core here is when we talk about mobile, but what they care
how
about
does
is be
Gen
able
Z
to
differ
engage
from
quickly, so to get in the
millennials in how they
storyline
engage
very
with content?
fast, right? And so they also, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it, but there are two type of content that they consume because the stereotype is Gen Z only consume short form. This is not true. They also consume long form. They can spend hours and hours on a device consuming content,
Mm,
but also they have those very short amount of time in between classes when they are in school, in between chat messages when they want to engage with content. And at that point you need to be able to give them good content in a very short period of time, and in order to do that the content has to be engaging within the first 10-15 seconds.
mm.
If not, they just double click, swipe up, go to the next thing. So when we build content for the Gen Z, we need to be able to get a story and characters that will get them hooked and engaged immediately.
Right, that makes sense. It's kind of like a 6 second YouTube ad to a certain degree.
It is, yeah.
You kind of have to prove you're worth it very, very fast today.
Very, very fast. And that goes into the genre that you can work with when it comes to short form on mobile. Like comedy, for example, or sci-fi requires a lot of character building and requires time to get you engaged within the storyline. So they are genre that you are very difficult to work with on the short form on mobile.
Right.
Where everything that is around romance and fear and thriller are things that you can trigger those emotions very, very quickly. So that narrows down the type of content you can work with when it comes to short form on mobile.
So do you find that you're sort of you find yourselves appealing to those kind of emotions in your product, sort of catching on things that you know will elicit a very quick, immediate response?
Yeah, all the time. And that's things that we learn, right? Where that was obviously, as we talk about it, that's obvious, but when you build and you don't necessarily know that at first. And so we actually worked across genre and tested everything, and we saw that I've actually those genre were not really working. Or maybe to be more specific, as we get into the product, is there's two type of content, which is true also when it comes to longer form. And when you think about the Netflix of the
Hmm.
world, you need content that will acquire the user, so content that will get the user to the platform and get them to basically subscribe or get into a trial. And once they are a customer, once they are engaged with your product, then you need to have content that will retain those users. And so for us, yes, those two genera that I talk about that require very quick engagement or can trigger quick engagement are very good for acquisition. So for content that will get users to come in and like the product and basically sign up for a trial or pay for the content. But then after that, those other content, other genera like comedy, sci-fi, are things that we still work with, but with users that are already engaged, that are already paying customers, that are now understand the quality of the product, and have time to dedicate to the platform. So they have already some equity built into the product. So now they have more patience, I would say, to spend some time and really engage with the storyline that takes more time to get engaged with.
It reminds me of something that our sort of chief creative officer at Iron Source has said. I'm not sure that he necessarily coined the term, but he talked about scabbiting, and this idea that sort of why is it,
Yeah.
for example, that kind of Donald Trump's conversion rate, let's call it, is super high, versus,
Hmm.
let's say, an Obama. I mean, both of them won elections, to be fair. Um, there
Yeah.
is something about tapping into when you want an immediate response, and when you're talking about acquiring users or acquiring voters,
Yeah.
you want to be touching on those very basic, very powerful emotions, because they do sort of elicit also quite visceral responses. But I do that,
Very. Yeah.
especially when it comes to storytelling, you need to find a way to keep people around. I mean, at the end of the day, it's affinity or kind of loyalty that will keep people around for the long term. There's only so often you're willing to be scared.
No, exactly. I mean, and also to be fair, in that generation, especially for us, especially we are on more on the female side. So a lot of our audience, mostly female, and there is for that younger generation, they love getting scared. So there is still a lot of affinity for that genre. But yes, you're right. Is that there is so many times that you can get this dopamine rush within the first seconds. At some point, you want also to offer more, where you can really engage with a longer storyline.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk about sort of building those stories. You partnered with a creative studio called M2, which focuses on multi-platform
Mhm.
storytelling. When you were working on Yarn, what's the creative process like when you're looking at sort of writing scripts for Yarn?
So it really depends on the partner. So you mentioned M2. We work with M2. We work with actually M2 is a very interesting one because M2 understands very well digital and short form. We work also with the bigger studio, like we work with Disney on all their Marvel IP. We work with Sony, with NBC. So there's like a wide range of type of creators. So we see, for example, with M2, they were creating everything. They were writing everything. We obviously give them guidelines on what we've seen working before, on how many characters you want, with the length of the story, like we created what we call a Bible of like things that we know usually work. And so they write, we upload in Yarn, and obviously we review to make sure that it's in line with our quality standards. But when it's also uploaded, we have data that will tell us what the engagement looks like on a line by line basis. So we feed that data back to the writers, and actually a story that has been uploaded may change over time because we see things in the story that don't necessarily work. And at that point, the writers will go and try to optimize towards what we look at, towards KPIs like completion of the episode, but also what we call continuation. So from going from one episode to another. So that's the process with a studio like M2. With a studio like Marvel, actually it's both of us, them and us working. So usually we write for Marvel, and their writers review what we write and edit and make sure that the way the characters are talking are in line with their guidelines. And so there's a lot of back and forth, and then goes into the platform.
And when you're working with larger studios like Marvel, do you find that there's less flexibility or less openness to optimizing or iterating on the story over time based on that data feedback?
So yeah, that's a very interesting dynamic with them. They are actually thinking a lot bigger in terms of what they can do, but when it comes to execution, it's quite painful. So it's kind of like when you're in the meeting, they love it. They have massive ideas and things like, yeah, that makes so much sense. That's going to be so fun. And then it comes to writing, and then you get into, oh no, we cannot say that, we cannot do that. Spider-Man cannot do those kind of things. Like, so it is a tricky thing. They are obviously extremely creative, which is why they are where they are. But also now, because they deal with an IP that is so famous, they have to be very careful
Right,
about what they do
right.
with it.
And what's kind of your process for looking at products for Gen Z more generally? What's your process for identifying and evaluating products that you think will or won't be a fit for Gen Z?
Yeah, so for us, first, we are outside of like core gaming, right? I would say we are the hyper casual, right? Because we are basically, it's all mostly content. A lot of, obviously, we use gamification and gaming mechanics and virtual currency and all the things that are happening in games, but we deal only with content. So when we think about how we create a new product for Gen Z, we look at what is disrupting in terms of how they will consume content beyond just consuming what I call snackable content on social platform. So what we look at is obviously, and we learned that along the way, but it has to be short form. It has to be like less than 2 minutes to get into to consume that piece of content. So that's one thing, regardless of
Mm-hmm.
the format. Then the other thing that we look at interactivity. It cannot be a passive consumption. You have to have some kind of action with the screen. So it cannot just be you launch a video or you launch a piece of content and you wait and you watch or you read. You have to tap on the screen. You have to make decisions. You have to engage with the content. You have to build equity with the product. And then after that, for us, it comes down to, again, to the same thing that game publishers are looking at. We look at our LTV and CAC, right? So we look at how strong of an LTV we can get. So it's obviously, like everybody knows, a combination of retention and conversion rate into paying actions or consumption of ads. And then it's testing ads across networks to see what is going to be the cost of acquisition, how good the format is to acquire users, what is the IPM of those ads, are they very engaging or not? So it goes from the product itself to be very engaging, and then is there a good LTV to CAC ratio that will allow us to scale?
Mm-hmm. How do you go about testing for marketability with Gen Z?
So we are lucky enough right now. So when we started, it was really just our guts and trying and then acquiring users against that MVP that we built. That was for the first app. But now we have a couple apps at scale. Wishbone got over 30 million downloads so far, and actually Wishbone is a perfect marketplace for us to ask for opinion. This is an opinion app. You vote on things, right? So we use that to test our own things, right? We use that to ask for feedback on things that we want to test, but also we have access to those users. So we actually do get on the phone with our users. We do group interview here in the office. So we have access to those users now because we have products that they're already interacting with.
And what's kind of the spending power of Gen Z? They're about to become, well, will within a decade become a very sort of significant part of kind of global consumers. Are they spenders?
They are spenders. And again, remember, Gen Z goes all the way to 24 years old. So there is a wide range of users. We don't obviously do with users that are less than 13. All of our product are 13 plus. So we deal with 13 to 25. When you're on the higher end, when you're on the 18-25, they have disposable income from themselves by working jobs or from their parents. So they have access to cash in their iTunes account to spend on single transaction. And they are not thinking much like maybe older generation do, where it's like 99 cents, $1.99. They don't really think that it's a lot because they are used to spend $3 to $4 on the cup of coffee. So when you ask for 99 cents, when they ask for 99 cents or $1.99, they're like, yeah, sure, it's not even a coffee. I'll spend that to get my piece of content. So they are not caring much about the amount. And then the younger one, actually, especially on the Apple platform, Apple made it very easy for younger folks to spend. So I have kids myself that are Gen Zs, and I see that all the time, where I get notifications on my screen saying, my son wants to spend 99 cents or wants to subscribe to a product. So it's just for me to accept or deny. And so it makes it very easy for them to spend, on the younger generation, to spend on a digital, on a device like the iPhone. So it is actually pretty easy to get that audience to spend.
And how do they view brands? I mean, I sort of can remember hearing that more and more your average consumer is quite sort of distrustful of brands, they're looking for sort of messages coming from big brands that aren't overtly marketing focused, but more sort of about being sincere and authentic, and not overly brandy, I guess. So how does that translate for Gen Z? Are they sort of indifferent to brands, hostile, favorable?
I mean, they love brands first and foremost. They are big fan, right? So when they engage with the brand, they are all in or not in at all. There's no like in middle. But when it comes to interacting with marketing messages, yes, they are much more into native integration. So they love when brands are partnering with influencers. They love when for example, for us, I'll take two examples, one on Wishbone, one on Yarn. But on Wishbone, having a brand ad as a full screen interstitial is not really their thing. If it's a full screen interstitial, they rather have like a playable from Iron Source, for example, where they can interact with the game, see if they like it or not. If they like it, they're going to go and download and play with it. But if it's just to look at a 30 seconds video of a car, that's not their thing. But then what, for example, we did with Sephora, that or even Starbucks, both of them came on the platform and created their own account on Wishbone and start creating content for people to vote. And so they were voting on what makeup do you prefer, what color of drinks do you prefer, those kind of things. So users were interacting with the brand. They are a big fan of the brand. They love interacting with the brand this way.
Yeah, it all really goes back to interactivity, as you said.
Yeah, they love the interactivity. They love the brand being part of what they do during the day, and not just being forced into consuming some kind of marketing messages. And the same with Yarn. Yarn is a different platform. It's storytelling, but it's very similar to what happens in the movie industry. It's product placement. So we have stories where for example, we have a story where it's a businesswoman traveling the world, and when she calls her friend back home, she used Skype. So in the story, she's using Skype, and that's the brand name is obviously mentioned, and that's the users don't mind. Actually, that makes total sense, right? And so that's how brands get themselves in front of Gen Zs, and in a very meaningful way, and a way that they will remember the brand.
And you did a collaboration with Musical.ly star Kristen Hancher. Is that a sign of more to come, to also sort of partnerships like that, or working with influencers work well with Gen Z?
Yes, 100%. So Gen Z's celebrities are completely different from the celebrities of the millennials or Gen X or boomers, right? It's for them, when you talk to younger folks and you say, who are your favorite actor, and they keep mentioning YouTube names, you're like, who are they? And so working with them when it comes to tell stories makes so much sense. So that's how we work with Kristen, because she had such a big first social footprint. So we could basically promote the story very well through our own channels. And also the engagement with our fan base was massive, because she was acting. And so they were really looking forward to see her beyond just the pose that she had on all the social platforms, but seeing her as an actress. But also remember, all those celebrities from social platforms, they are looking for ways to monetize their celebrity status. And right now, the only way, or up until now, the only way that they could do that was through brand sponsorship on their channels. And that just turns them into basically a vehicle for the brand, but that's not a way for them to showcase their talent. So all those influencers are actually looking for ways to monetize their status, leveraging their talent. So offering them to be part of a story, to act, to sing, to dance, it's something that they love, and also things that social platforms are looking for, to have their celebrities to be recognized for their talent.
And sort of talking about reaching new audiences, how does Yarn split up its marketing efforts? Or really maybe speaking more broadly, also including Wishbone, what's Gen Z's sort of preferred channel for finding new apps? How do they like, you mentioned, playable ads, for example, and I think it probably goes to interactivity, but where do Gen Z like to find their next kind of content fix?
So for us, like you mentioned, all the gaming networks with playable ads are number one. This is where they can engage with the format. This is where they are, because they play a lot of games and they spend a lot of time on their phone. So this is where we can find them. And then it's on social platforms, but not all social platforms. Facebook doesn't work. Instagram is okay. Snapchat works really well. TikTok works really well. So it's kind of where they are, which is Snap, TikTok, and gaming ad network. And then it's outside of like standard paid user acquisition, is what we just mentioned before, is working with influencers. So we do a lot of work with smaller and bigger influencers that talk about the product or part of the product.
And do you find that sort of, I'm curious about this, you're probably not doing much of it, but do Gen Z also, or do you find that sort of companies that are targeting Gen Z consumers will also invest in kind of more typical traditional brand advertising? I mean, to a certain degree, influencers is kind of like that, but are you ever seeing companies go after sort of old school, TV ads or sort of, I guess, I mean, what, out of home?
No, I mean we tried actually. We partnered with Disney on a lot of things and tried TV commercials on their core Gen Z channels. That is used to be called ABC Family, now called Freeform in the US, and it just doesn't work. I mean, you see a little blip of installs, and that's about it. So they remember now where they spend their time is on YouTube to consume content outside of social platform. It's YouTube, it's audio OTT like Netflix, Hulu, and all those places. So trying to spend money on TV advertising on standard cable TV doesn't work well. But advertising on YouTube, yes. Advertising on if possible like on a Hulu where there is some ad supported, yes, that's interesting. But remember also for and probably for listeners that are in the space is YouTube for app downloads. We cannot just target YouTube for app downloads, right? There's you have to go through UAC and so you basically have to target the entire network. So actually we're pretty limited about what we can do with YouTube to target just an app download. So that's why for us, like all those things that are outside of those core channels that I mentioned before are pretty challenging to work with.
Interesting. And for my last question, something that's maybe a little bit more, I guess, future looking. Do you think, I mean, it already covers quite a broad range of ages, but do you think Gen Z will evolve in their preferences as they age? And how, or will you change kind of your app accordingly, or whatever products you're working on at the time accordingly?
I mean, will that change? Probably with new platforms and new ability to deliver content. So will VR work at some point and get some scale, and that may change the way we have to deliver content, maybe. I think that's actually as behavior change, and that's how generation are being defined. I was reading a paper on that. They look for 5 years, five years in a row of change of behaviors in the way they consume. And so we may actually find that generation alpha has a different type of behaviors when it comes to consumption of content. And at this point, is that it's going to be up to us. Do we want to build product for that generation? Probably. The answer is yes, because that's the upcoming generation. They are born and will grow up with those new behaviors. So yes, but I think Gen Z is actually defined by the way they consume. So it's like millennials. Yes, we are evolving a bit as we see new platforms, but we're still kind of anchored in the way we are. We've been educated, the world we've been living in, and those like 30 years of education and living in this world got us set in the way we are behaving.
Super interesting. This has been a very enjoyable. It feels almost philosophical, and I have to say I might feel more affinity for Gen Z than I do for millennials, but I guess that's no surprise. Benoit, thank you very much for being on the show with us and sharing all of your sort of in-depth knowledge on Gen Zers. And everyone else, thanks so much for listening. Tune in to our next episode where we'll be talking all things mobile game growth, development, and enjoyment. iOS or Android?
iOS.
Game Boy or Xbox?
Game Boy.
Suits or jeans?
Jeans.
Backstreet Boys or NSYNC?
NSYNC.